Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 7, where we are talking about feminist family therapy. So, the real tagline of essentially the feminist movement and the various waves of the feminist movement is that the personal is political. So, I'm giving I don't know who to give the kudos to for coming up with this, but it was popularized by Carol Hanisch, ultimately saying that we are we are political beings, that our experience on the earth is politicized. So this has informed the feminist movement, which has consequently informed feminist family therapy as well. So just another quote to continue to set up, in many ways, why we need feminism. Man is defined as a human being and a woman as a female. Whenever she behaves as a human being, she is said to imitate the male. So in many ways, that's the default way of assessing, of seeing the world, of policies. The default is for men. So just giving you an opportunity to pause here for some reflection. Growing up, what messages did you receive about being a man or woman? Um, how did you imagine your socialization? How do you imagine your socialization will influence your practice as a therapist? And like, spoiler alert here, it will. Um, so giving you an opportunity here to pause and just think about that. All right. So first, we're going to talk about some gender roles and theory. Also being very clear here, the feminist movement has had many waves. We are currently in the fourth wave of the feminist movement. The initial wave was super exclusionary. It really only included, cisgender white women of middle to higher socioeconomic status, able-bodied. So it's basically all the privilege except for gender. Um, so as there have been iterations and further waves, I encourage you to think about feminism as more of a like multicultural critique or multicultural approach, um, even though its roots were primarily about women and again like a very specific type of woman. So just letting you know that the feminist approach looks at more than gender. It really looks at marginalization and power and privilege and oppression. But anyway, I am digressing a little bit here. Maybe I'm going to move myself so you can see my text. So traditional gender roles versus feminist gender roles here. So, an androcentric is a male oriented construct that constitutes the norms used to draw conclusions about humans, including female nature or the nature of women. So, traditional women's gender roles and dispositions of connectedness and interdependence are devalued, and independence and autonomy are exalted, seen as necessary, superior, and those tend to be seen as male gender roles or men's gender roles. Relational cultural theory challenges the androcentric view. So this looks at women's identity and self-concept and seeing that it develops in the context of relationships, which you are going to see is central to the feminist approach, the therapeutic relationship, the social um, support system relationships. Those are central to this approach, and it accepts the notion of intrinsic gender differences. All right, let's see where else we can go here. All right, I'm still in a good spot. I'll move myself back up over here. So again, more traditional roles, gender centric, that there are two separate, innate, biologically rooted paths of development for men and women. Then, from a feminist perspective, sociocultural and power analyses challenge the gender centric view. So, this is seen as a socialization process. So traditional women's gender roles and dispositions have been acquired or learned in the context of women's subservient position. And this theory rejects the notion of intrinsic gender differences. Okay, so what is feminism? It is an orientation that considers the consequences of stereotyped sex roles and the statuses prescribed by society for females and males should be part of therapeutic practice. So, understanding gender differences in terms of socialization, that should be a part of the work that we do. It's also a humanistic framework or worldview concerned with the roles, rules, and functions that organize male and female interactions. Then feminism is a critique of patriarchy and oppression of all forms. All right, so what is feminist therapy? It is a feminist approach to family therapy. It is value driven more than technique driven. You'll see this when I talk more in detail about specifics of this approach. So, feminist therapy is a revolutionary therapeutic modality, which not only means a technique, but also a theory of individual and social change. Embedded within it is understanding gender and power as the core of therapeutic practice. All right, so why do we need this? Despite all the efforts of psychotherapists, the incidence of psychopathology continues to increase. Psychotherapy is a conservative enterprise that perpetuates the same values and aspirations that critique the need or that create the need for therapy. So, in many ways, this speaks to the third point here that mainstream psychotherapy embraces a status quo. So, from a feminist critique, therapy at best creates second order change, and that's part of the limitation. So, in many ways, if you really think about therapy, what we try to do is help people navigate unjust systems without really changing the system. So, in many ways, we are complicit and we are embracing a status quo by virtue of not like abolishing systems, dismantling systems. So, that's one of the critiques. So psychotherapists lack the wider theoretical perspectives to identify the ideological determinant worlds of their clients. So what is going on with them? Even though it makes little sense to foster adjustment to pathological, social, cultural, and economic systems, psychotherapists promote these ideas routinely. It's just another way to say what I was talking about in the last slide. The psychotherapy process is not designed to deal with social and cultural pathology. We will be, I will be demonstrating this in a little vignette that I'll share with you later on in this presentation. But ultimately, psychotherapy is still a very individualistic process. And in many ways, our society and our culture is sick. But therapy is not designed to address that. So, statement of the problem: most graduates of psychotherapy programs do not grasp fully the role of class, gender, race, and culture, etc., in the etiology of psychopathology. And etiology just means like the origins, the beginning of it, nor its potential value in treatment. So, some of our dilemma: too often, when the world is messed up for political reasons, therapists are silent. Sometimes we're worried about what will this do for my business? Am I going to exclude or alienate certain potential clients? In these instances, the therapist must acknowledge facts, be supportive of the client, and discuss the problem. It is inherently therapeutic to help a person understand the injustice of their predicament and how and reflect on the question of their own agency and take action, whatever action they see fit. So this is essentially saying broach hard topics, bring social location, social issues, cultural issues, larger picture things into the room and speak to it. So it's the injustice of the predicament and a reflection or question of their own agency. So, like I said, in many ways, how psychotherapy works is we can identify unjust systems, and then we need to identify where the person's agency is so they can navigate it. because so like my hope for our field is that we do eventually change unjust systems, and in the meantime, when they're not changed, we have to equip people with and get provide them a space with how to navigate it. So it's a both and. Systems are unjust, and we have to live and navigate them every day. The hope is that they change, and until they do, how do we navigate them? Okay, so some assumptions from a feminist perspective about human nature. We exist in a political and social system that is male dominated, aka the patriarchy. The personal is political. In order for women to experience changes in their personal lives, political changes to social institutions must occur. And gender schemas, if you remember back to CBT, these are basically belief systems. And sex role stereotypes limit development. So in society, men have more power than women, and women are taught to rely on men. And I will say this until I turn blue in the face: the patriarchy harms everyone. Because think about how, for example, like the loneliness epidemic in men. Men are not socialized to connect or be vulnerable. So in terms of like connecting in a meaningful way with friends, with partners, with family, we have not shown men how to do that, and we have not reinforced it. And what I will say too is women are culprits in this. Um, I can't remember if I shared this in this class yet, but if I did, you can fast forward through this piece. But there was a interview. So I really love the work of Brene Brown and her work on shame. And I was listening to like an audiobook or something that I forget what the name, but it was basically a book about how like shame manifests differently in men and women. But as like maybe a preface to this piece, Brene was recalling a conversation that she had. It was post like I think she had done like a book reading or a round table or something like that. And she was at a table after the discussion or presentation and was signing people's books. And this man and woman who had been married for quite some time came up to her, and the man had asked her or had made a comment where he's like, the research that you've done on shame in women is so interesting, and I'm wondering what you know or what you've learned about men's shame. And as Brene is sharing the story, she recalls she was like, oh, and I felt like so relieved because I hadn't done that research. So I didn't, have to come up with an answer. So I just shared with him, I don't know, I haven't done any research in that area. And the man responded to her, well, isn't that convenient? And he said, so I think it's again, man and woman married for a while, have two, I think like grown-ish daughters, maybe teens, early 20s or something like that. And he said to Brene, my family would rather see me die than fall off the white horse. In many ways, what he was saying is, I don't have a choice but to be stoic, to be a rock. I am not reinforced in any way, shape, or form to be vulnerable. And, in society, that's everyone's responsibility. So I hope that example helps to understand this, and just like how the patriarchy is limiting and harmful to everyone. Okay, so contributions to feminism to the field. Uh, Feminists talk about growth fostering relationships. So one of the goals is to foster personal growth of both the client and the therapist. So as a feminist therapist, the goal for you is to grow. The goal for you is to learn from your clients and have generative conversations, and come out of this process changed. It's also to increase the client's capacity to be in relationships out of session. So one of the goals, and I would say like tenets of feminist therapy, is that you create a really solid bond between you, the therapist, and the client. And in many ways, that is meant to serve as like a surrogate or a model to show the client that like meaningful connection with another human is possible, so that they go and so they figure out like, what am I doing to contribute to the safety and the vulnerability within this relationship, and how can I replicate that outside using discernment of who's worthy and all of that kind of stuff. And both of these are in the goal of increasing connection. The feminist therapists have also contributed the 5 good things, which are listed below here as growth fostering relationships, including zest and energy, a sense of self-worth, knowledge and clarity of self, the other person, and the relationship. So this is really highlighting interdependence, that I know who I am, I know who the other person is, and I'm able to be myself and show up authentically within the relationship because I understand like the boundaries of it. Also, growth fostering relationships should include creativity and productivity and a desire for more connection without feeling helpless or needy. And I love this last piece. Of course, as being a person who has codependent tendencies and a people pleaser, of course, I love to hear this. But I also think that these things are very normal in just the human experience. So, I mean, think about how often, for example, women are labeled needy, how often that they are categorized as helpless. I would argue more often than men. So, in many ways, this is giving women an explicit permission to recognize like their needs are important, and relationships help fill needs. And the hope is also that men are open to hearing this too, so they're open to being available for their partners, as well as like asking for these things from their partners and having willing partners for this. One of the things that I like to say, because we are so quick to label people as needy, and what I really wish would be said is your needs, which are valid. We all have needs and we all have differing needs. And I think in many ways we pathologize needs that others can't meet. And I wish that people would say, your needs are valid and they exceed my capacity to meet them. Um, I think that that's a lot more accurate than the labeling that happens, and the dismissiveness that comes with those labels of needy and helpless. Okay, so I'm going to come out of this and minimize this so I can show you a video. You can see my Miss Rachel search stuff on on the side for my son. But here's some further, like a video that I think is really helpful in just giving some further language to feminist therapy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Susan Hillock. Welcome to Introduction to Feminist Counseling. Some of you may have questions about the topic. For example, what is feminism? Or how do I apply feminist theory to counseling? And some of you may even be wondering, how do I know if I'm a feminist? Let's explore these questions. Popular culture has portrayed feminism in fairly negative and stereotypic fashion. If you close your eyes and think about feminism, you'll probably imagine a man-hating woman who refuses to shave her legs or wear makeup, who spends her leisure time burning bras. I don't know about you, but given the price of bras these days, that seems a pretty expensive, if unlikely, hobby. These negative stereotypes serve a purpose. Within patriarchy, they function to keep people in the dark about what feminism actually is. They also guarantee that people are pretty reluctant to identify as feminists. When asked to define feminism, local mall shoppers and university students said,
it's against men.
Women's rights.
They're taking the idea of equality too far.
I don't know. So that was something to do with girls.
It's about women's equality.
For the purposes of this presentation, we define feminism as a way of thinking, approaching, and analyzing women's and other marginalized groups' socioeconomic, political status, and situated experiences of oppression within patriarchy. Feminists also critique the way societies choose to organize and distribute power, status, privilege, and wealth, and analyze how these choices privilege dominant groups and oppress marginalized groups. Although there are many types of feminism, most feminist counselors share these values and principles. The personal is political. They help create more awareness and promote critical thinking about how social structures can contribute to the problems that individuals and groups may be experiencing. Reconceptualize power. Feminist counselors identify the power imbalance between dominant and subordinate groups. Rename reality. They link people's private experiences with public issues. Create new methodologies. They look for effective ways to make change and end violence. Similar to other approaches, feminist counselors follow these basic counseling stages. Preparation. They ensure that their meeting space is private and comfortable. They also take time to think about the people they are about to see and how they can best meet their needs. Beginning, which includes introductions, joining an engagement, introducing confidentiality, and beginning to collaboratively set goals. Middle, choosing, contracting, and implementing agreed upon goals and intervention plans. Ending, evaluate the service user progress, establish future goals and support, and initiate closure. In contrast to mainstream approaches, feminist counselors apply values which can be labeled as distinctly feminist. Some of these are power sharing, making sure the counseling relationship is less intimidating by sharing power with the service user, valuing process as equal to product. The feminist approach emphasizes that the journey is just as important as the destination, ensuring informed consent. Feminist counselors demystify the counseling process and share pertinent information with service users. De-experting. Feminist counselors ensure that the service users, not the counselors, are viewed as experts in their own lives, valuing service users. They seek out examples of service user strengths, capacities, and resilience in order to affirm and validate what people are capable of achieving, encouraging self-expression through art, music, stories, myths, narratives, and rituals.
So I'm going to pause it here because we don't need that little role play. Come back here. So hopefully that was helpful in giving some clear explanations of terminology you'll hear in this approach and other postmodern approaches. Okay, so within the therapeutic process, the goal is for as much of an egalitarian relationship as possible. So here's the thing. Power is central to this approach. So there's not a denial of the power structure within the therapeutic relationship. So you name it, you acknowledge it, and you do what you can to be experts in the room. So feminist therapy is not about in this room, we're equals. No, you're not. You're a therapist, you're providing a service. Somebody is coming to you for help with something that they are struggling with. So you acknowledge that you're in a power position and you talk explicitly about that and reassure them, I'm the expert in the process of therapy. You are the expert of your life. And together we co-construct helpful approaches for you to implement in your life. So there's a recognition of sources of oppression. Again, this is in Bronfenbrenner's approach, going all the way from the microsystem out to the macro system, also including the chronosystem. So during the process, you're developing an egalitarian relationship, explicitly acknowledging power within the relationship. You're exploring sources of marginalization and disconnection. It's really, at the end of the day, a feminist family therapist goal is to create a connection. That's where really we believe that healing happens. You want to foster authenticity and empowerment through the therapeutic relationship as a model to extrapolate that to other relationships in the client's life. Then you want to build better relationships and communities as defined by the client. Okay, so the therapeutic relationship, as I said before, there's an open discussion of power dynamics that are involved in therapy. So a pure feminist therapist does not diagnose. Feminist therapists do not like the DSM. They see it as a product of the patriarchy that it's inherently oppressive. So the diagnosis process is recognizing also that, let me say this in a different way. Feminist family therapists who don't have to don't diagnose. It is a part of our field. So if you want to get paid and you use insurance, insurance requires a diagnosis. So the diagnosis process is co-constructed. So I have brought out, like when I would work in person, and even now electronically, I'll do this where I will present the DSM to the client and say, here's areas where I think we could explore in terms of a diagnosis for you, and I'll tell you exactly why I have to diagnose you. So I'll talk about the relationship between therapy and insurance and why it's necessary, and I'll also field questions about, what does it mean to be diagnosed? Who will know about that? All that kind of stuff. You have an open discussion about the communication with other professionals. So this is in some ways a given through a release of information or an ROI, but you more than just like getting that through the informed consent process, you talk very explicitly about, like, I'm thinking about reaching out to your OBGYN to talk about struggles that you're having with infertility. Or your medical professional, your caseworker, your whoever, and here is why. What do you think? And then open discussion of any theories that you're using. This is really just a matter of principle in terms of transparency. I share this with clients as part of my like informed consent, like opening spiel for clients. Many times they don't care. But sometimes I do. So that's why I keep doing it. You have a mutual exploration of how to resolve client issues. So nothing in a feminist approach is prescriptive. Nothing is, no information, like no suggestions are given, no advice is given. This is very much in the hands of the client, where you are metaphorically walking with them through this process. You also will engage in more liberal self-disclosure as a feminist therapist. This is like my kind of framework approach, which, because I like it because of the ability to connect on a human level, and also its high level of accountability. So if you ever make an error or think you messed up, say it, bring it up to the client. And if they want further discussion about it, great. If they don't, let it go. Open to correction and feedback from the client. Feminist therapy is very feedback informed. I often will say things like, correct me if I'm wrong, I might be off base here. This is just a theory that's coming up, or this is a theory that's coming up for me. I'm going to make an interpretation here. Let me know if anything I say doesn't feel true to you. Let me know if you don't resonate with any of this. So statements like that. Sharing information about self, what from a feminist perspective is what builds trust and authenticity. So one thing I'll say to my clients is, as a feminist therapist, a feminist informed therapist, our relationship is the most important thing that we have. I could I could deliver the most perfect interventions. And if you don't trust me, if you don't feel heard, seen, or understood by me, it won't matter. So I will always privilege your experience in this room. I will consistently be asking for feedback. And also, I will answer any question you ask me. And so back, it's like that was my kind of thing to them. Back to my role as a professor, there's very little that I could think of that a client could ask me where I would be like, ooh, I don't want to answer that. So I'll say things to them like, if you want to know who I voted for in the last presidential election, if you want to know my perspective on various like things going on in the world that you see in the news, ask me, I will answer. And so from my perspective, that is because they are recognizing that being in the role of client is so vulnerable, and it's so unequal. It's equitable because that's the relationship that we signed up for, but it's unequal in terms of, like, sometimes things about your client no one else on the planet knows, and like they don't even know you have a dog or something like that, right? So I invite that type of question. And I answer it because I truly believe it's a client like wanting to build trust, wanting to build safety within the relationship. So I'll always answer. So that's my stance as a feminist informed therapist. Okay, so feminist code of ethics first is recognizing the impact of the dominant culture. So you're going to ask questions about that. You're going to explore that person contextually and socially. You want to acknowledge power differences in the therapeutic room, in various relationships in their life, whether they are platonic, familial, romantic, work. You're understanding all of the power dynamics. You establish therapist accountability. This is by being overt about mistakes you believe you made, wanting overt about repairs, about the therapeutic process, getting feedback. Feedback is inherently accountability building. And then promoting social change is one of the overall goals. So the feminist approach includes things like getting active in various political movements, encouraging clients to become active in causes that are close to them, and you walk that walk too as a feminist therapist. Okay, so I'm going to have a couple slides on case conceptualization, and then I will give you the vignette to like consider. So as I said, the personal is political, separate internal, external sources of problems. Or you separate internal and external sources of problems through awareness of oppression, privilege, and the impact of the society on the individual. Politics in the DSM diagnosis. So DSM diagnosis is seen as an oppressive practice, though a label can be useful if it helps the client understand the self. Treatment does not encourage the patient client to examine and confront their environment. It merely strengthens the status quo. This is what I believe is the vignette is a good example of this. And this, I think, may be a vignette if y'all have taken psychopathology that you have seen. So self in relation theory. So the experience of self is organized and developed in the context of important relationships. So again, very relationally based approach. We develop our sense of self within relationships, including the therapeutic relationship. And it can be different in each context and each relationship. So authenticity doesn't mean you show up exactly the same in every single context. And for various marginalized individuals, this is a act of survival. It is a means of safety to show up differently in different contexts. That doesn't mean that you're being inauthentic. It means that you're using discernment to still show up authentically and safely in different contexts. So you're looking at things like marginalization and oppression. Oppression and isolation is the largest contributor to presenting concerns from this approach. That's the theory, is disconnection drives distress, drives people into therapy and struggle. So connection is inherently healing. Relational images are a part of the case conceptualization. You're looking at internal constructs and expectations of relationships, generally based on early life experiences. So even though the feminist approach doesn't focus a ton on history, you do some exploration to understand how it affects present relationships. So the second piece of case conceptualization, and then the vignette. So you also are privileging relational resilience. So it moves back into you teach a client how to move back into relationships after disconnection, after empathic failures, and asking for help when needed. This includes modeling this in the therapeutic relationship. So there absolutely will be potentially like therapeutic ruptures or alliance ruptures, therapeutic or empathic failures. But many times we give up on what could be very fulfilling, meaningful relationships when these pieces like disconnection, empathic failures have happened. So that's what relational resilience is learning how to move back into these relationships. Of course, when they're safe and worthy of that time and effort. Not every relationship needs to be returned to or repaired. Sometimes they do, and that can be really enriching to learn how to step back into a relationship once there's been some hurt, particularly in like committed romantic relationships that are foundationally safe, but maybe have some difficulties with communication, or connection or something like that. So you're also looking for courage, and you're trying to empower this anytime that you can, recognizing that courage requires vulnerability and a willingness to open up to one another. So again, believing that disconnection and disconnection is a driver of struggle and distress, that one of the biggest elements of meaningful connection is vulnerability. And it's scary, especially because we are not reinforced to be vulnerable in our society. So you're also enhancing a sense of mattering and connection. So you're assessing relationships and contexts when and how the client feels valued. So this is essentially using discernment of, are these worthy people worthy of being in relation to you? Then mattering to someone is vital to mental and relational health. So guess who, if this client feels like they matter to no one else, guess who they are going to learn they matter to? You. So disconnection strategies and the central relational paradox. You also want to identify the client's strategies to disconnect from others when they're feeling vulnerable, and like recognize these and try to reroute them. So like if they have a tendency to run away, if they have a tendency to shut down, if they have a tendency to, you know, disconnect for a long period of time in terms of like not returning phone calls, texts, like anything like that. You want to recognize those so that you can work on them for that person to not be so scared of being vulnerable, because that's what builds meaningful connection. Okay, so now I'm going to present this case vignette. So in psychopathology, you likely, if you have taken it, you've likely, I'm gonna like minimize myself here so we can see all of this. You've likely heard this one, or you will if you're in it. So maybe I'm giving you a little bit of a primer. So let me read this to you, and I'm going to give you a couple of cues for reflection. So Elizabeth Jacks grew up in a Persian family and ran a catering service with her second husband, Donald. At age 38, Elizabeth already had two grown children. She and Donald had an unplanned pregnancy, which upset her, but they decided to have the baby. Since the news of the pregnancy, she had seemed unnaturally sad. Starting at about 4 months, Elizabeth spent much of each day in bed, not arising until afternoon, when she began to feel a little less tired. Her appetite, ferocious during her first trimester, fell off, so that by the time of delivery, she was several pounds lighter than usual for a full-term pregnancy. She had to give up keeping the household and business accounts because she couldn't focus her attention long enough to add a column of figures. Still, the only time Donald became really alarmed was one evening at the beginning of Elizabeth's 9th month, when she told him that she had been she had been thinking for several days that she wouldn't survive childbirth and he would have to rear the baby without her. "You'll both be better off without me anyway," she had said. After her son was born, Elizabeth's mood brightened almost at once. The crying spells and the hours of rumination disappeared briefly. She seemed almost her normal self. However, late one Friday night, when the baby was 3 weeks old, Donald returned from catering a banquet to find Elizabeth wearing only a bra and panties and icing a cake. Two other just iced cakes were lined up on the counter, and the kitchen was littered with dirty pots and pans. She'd said she'd made one for each of us and she wanted to party, Donald told the clinician. "I started to change the baby. He was howling in his basket, but she wanted to drag me off to the bedroom. She said, 'Please, sweetie, it's been a long time.' I tried to shake her off without hurting her feelings so that I could help the baby. I mean, even if I hadn't been dead tired, who could concentrate on having sex with the baby crying like that? I felt very confused." All the next day, Elizabeth was out with her girlfriends, leaving Donald home with the baby. On Sunday, she spent nearly $300 for Christmas presents at an April garage sale. She seemed to have boundless energy, sleeping only for 2 to 3 hours a night before arising, rested and ready to go. On Monday, she decided to open a bakery and tried to charge over $1,600 worth of kitchen supplies to her Visa card. She'd have done the same the next day, but she talked so fast that the person she called to order the supplies couldn't understand her. In frustration, she slammed the phone down. Elizabeth's behavior became so erratic that for the next 2 evenings, Donald took off work to care for the baby, but his presence only seemed to provoke her sexual demands. Then he noticed the marijuana. Before Elizabeth became pregnant, she would have an occasional toke. She called it her herbs during the week. During the past week, not all the smells in the house had been fresh baked cake, so Donald thought she might be smoking again. Yesterday, Elizabeth had shaken him awake at 5 a.m. and announced, "I am becoming God." This was when he had made the appointment to bring her in for an evaluation. Elizabeth herself could hardly sit still during the interview. In a burst of speech, she described her renewed energy and plans for the bakery. She volunteered that she had never felt better in her life. In rapid succession, she then described her mood, which was ecstatic, how it made her feel when she had put on her best silky dress, sexy, and where she had purchased the dress, how old she had been when she bought it, and to whom she was married at the time. So, there are two ways, at least, to look at this vignette. You can look at this through the DSM and see pathology, 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 pathology that meet criteria for a specific diagnosis. A feminist therapist would first look at what is normal, because that's, a relative term, and what is very contextually informed. So I'll quickly go through this with some examples of, okay, so first of all, this entire narrative is Donald's. So Elizabeth hasn't even had like any voice in this, because he's the one that called for the appointment. So right away, like if I were a therapist for this like couple, I would definitely want to hear from her perspective. Okay, so she's 38, has two grown children. They decided to have the baby. Like, how did that go down? Like, how much voice did she really have in that process? Was it potentially coercive? I want to understand like what's going on there. And like, so she had given up keeping the household and business accounts. Like, okay, she's pregnant. What else is going on in her life to have difficulty like adding up a column of numbers? So also okay, so I'm just going through like the first paragraph here. In her 9th month, she said that she was worried about surviving childbirth, which is like a very real concern, a very, from my perspective, valid concern. And again, I don't know how she's been for the last 9 months with this pregnancy that she didn't want. And like maybe not feeling so great about herself with not being able to keep up with the household and business accounts, and just saying like, okay, maybe I'm just like, everyone's better off without me. Maybe it would just be better to not have me around. I'm feeling shame as an expectant mother, not really wanting this baby. I can't even keep up with, maybe basic tasks that I used to easily do. Also, like, okay, I'll stop after the second one, but then I'll give you what I would like for you to do is to go through this and really look at this through like a DSM lens and see how much pathology and how many pieces of criteria that you can identify. And then I want you to look at it again through the lens of this being like contextually valid and making sense. So I'm not sitting here saying like, dismiss any diagnosis. What I'm saying is the lens that we choose to look at a case through is so informative and so influential that you can become like where there's like kind of blinders on and you're only seeing it one way and it can only be pathology. So I'm just encouraging you to open up like possibilities. And that's all it is. Like nothing I've said here is definitive. It's a lot of curiosity of like, what was this like for her? Okay, so she had a baby, her mood brightened, like that's also pretty just like hormonally common for that to happen. So the baby was 3 weeks old. She's been uncomfortable for several months, I'm assuming, based on my experience with pregnancy. So he returned and Elizabeth was wearing a bra and panties and like feeling herself a little bit, maybe wanting to get a little bit frisky. There were pots and pans in the kitchen, like, okay. So I'm just thinking about somebody who hasn't had maybe some much physical and interacting with her partner. But I don't know if she's breastfeeding. I don't know if she's just feeling like all I'm doing right now is being a food, a place for food for my baby. Like I want some adult contact with my partner, with my husband. So I'm just giving you some examples here. So I hope that's helpful for you in looking through this from, again, both a DSM kind of pathology lens as well as a feminist lens of how are all of these areas where I've identified pathology or a criteria being met, how might that make sense and be contextually like normal? Okay, so goal setting, some of the underpinnings here, socio-political awareness and empowerment. So you want to help the clients be aware of their own social location. So some of the things that we've been doing in class with Person of the Therapist and being aware of how sociocultural values inform their identity. So you're going to be asking questions about their social location, their various aspects of their identity. And then the big goal, one of the biggest goals in a feminist approach is to foster growth building or growth fostering relationships that you want to build connection. Okay. I think I hope, I may have some repetitions in here. So we'll see. So some goals to address and challenge power, hierarchy, oppression, gender, role stereotypes, racial, religious, cultural, ethnic, and class stereotypes. So you're going to bring them to the forefront to be able to ask questions about them and see how much the client internalizes them, how much distress they've created in the client's life. You want to emphasize change rather than adjustment or acceptance. So that happened twice. I think I have at least, anyway, that's the one repetition that I know. To consider how these ideas can be internalized by both men and women and all other genders. So again, this presentation talks a lot in the binary. This applies to all human beings, all gender identities, to address how these ideas influence clients' functioning and interaction. Oh, that's how, that was another, this should have been a different one. Highlight how power inequities contribute to women's presenting issues in therapy. So again, how they contribute to a marginalized identity, a person with marginalized identities presenting issues in therapy. You want to emphasize, like I said, emphasize change rather than adjustment. Make equitable relationships in all personal and professional contexts. Challenge stereotypical and oppressive ideas through understanding where that person's social location is and how they've internalized any of these oppressive messages. And then, yep, so 2 repetitions here. Sorry, y'all. Address how these ideas influence clients' functioning and interactions. So a lot of it about just who you are, messages you've received about how you should be, and how that influences your distress and connection. Okay, so as the therapist, you are very much prioritizing the therapeutic alliance. You want to recognize power imbalance between yourself and the client and that egalitarian role. So a judicious use of self-disclosure to reduce power differential between you and the client. You're not going to label or pathologize. You're not giving interpretations without explicitly stating it's an interpretation, and recognizing that the client is the expert on their own life. So some interventions. So all of these interventions from other approaches and all interventions from other approaches may be used if they're adapted in a gender and culturally sensitive manner. So all interventions can be adapted to fit a feminist lens. So a gender role analysis is one intervention. You're encouraging the client to examine how cultural rules about gender affects the client's current distress. So a question you might ask is, in what ways do you see gender stereotyping affecting you at work, at home, in your family, with friends, with your children, in your religious community, in your ethnic community, et cetera, et cetera. So you're, again, making that explicit. Assertiveness training. So you're teaching the client, it's both psychoeducation and like role play practice. You're teaching the client the difference between assertive communication, passive communication, aggressive communication, and passive aggressive communication. And you want them to use assertive communication exclusively. Self-esteem training, so you're accepting feelings as rational and valid. So emotions are logical. All emotions are valid. It's just the way that we express them, the way that we connect with them or express them, try to express them to others, may not be very appropriate. So being able to please yourself and be pleased. So this is like, spending time alone, enjoying your own company, allowing others to help you, to support you, to do things for you. So this is, again, very much how women are socialized to be self-sacrificial, to be supportive of others while asking for help very minimally. It's trying to flip a lot of that on its head. Identify personal strengths and be gentle with self and accepting your personal imperfection. So having grace and compassion for yourself the same way you would for a loved one. Power analysis. So you want to emphasize, there's an emphasis on identifying the power differences in relationships in society and their impact on the family. So you are helping your clients to recognize different kinds of power they possess and how they and others exercise power. So I'll give you like a pretty common example in heterosexual relationships. So let's say that the man, so I'm being super stereotypical here. Let's say the man is like the breadwinner, so they control finances, they control, how money is spent or how money is allocated. Then they may come to therapy for maybe an issue in their sex life, where maybe the woman has a lower libido, wants sex less often. And so if you think about this in terms of power differences, in a place where the man has power, the woman doesn't. So generally what we do in relationships, we try to overall balance the power. So in some areas where one partner has power, they may not have any in another area. So in some ways, having a like lower sex drive is contextually makes a lot of sense for women because usually like they're the main caregiver. They may have full-time jobs while still doing like the majority of the housework. Sometimes they're parenting their partner, which is not very sexy. Like I don't really want to be intimate with a person that I feel like I have to remind to like put dishes in the dishwasher or clean up after themselves. So that also can be seen as a way, like a way of having power in a space that that the partner doesn't have all the power. So that lack of libido or that lack of desire can be seen as a way to try to have some power and influence. It's just one theory. Okay, so I wanted to also offer just, I'm not going to go over this at length, but just giving you some different types of feminism to understand and seeing the cause of the oppression, the oppressed, that's how it's maintained, the solution, the strengths, the limitations, and then a major commenter. So you can see there's liberal, reformist, equal rights feminism, there's radical feminism, there's Marxist feminism, there's dual systems feminism, there's difference feminism, there's post-structural feminism. So this you can definitely look through at your leisure. So also just some questions for you to consider. So again, pause here for some reflection. If you contemplate the feminist perspective, what specifically appeals to you about this approach? What doesn't appeal to you? And why do you think that might be? Then how would you use this approach working with a client who's a man? What would be different, or what would you do differently, if anything, rather than working with a client who is a woman? Then I will leave all of you with this as a feminist tagline of always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. So just keeping that in mind from a feminist perspective. And that is all I have for you today, y'all.